He taught the world how to build credit using fake identities. I taught myself how to live with the truth. I still hear the thud of boots on our marble stairs. They came at dawn. FBI windbreakers in a smear of storm gray, the dog barking himself hoarse, the kettle shrieking on the stove like it had seen a ghost. I stood barefoot in the kitchen with a mug I didn't remember lifting, my robe half tied, steam fogging my glasses while red and blue lights braided across the tile. "Ma'am, step aside." 3 words, and my life became an evidence bag. They knew where everything was: his hidden safe behind the nursery bookshelf, the false bottom in the antique credenza, the safety deposit keys taped under the dining table. Someone had given them a map of his kingdom. Someone who knew the house like an old song. Someone like me. I put the mug down so carefully, you'd think it was a bomb. And maybe it was. Maybe everything we'd built had been ticking all along. They took the hard drives, the ledgers, the black moleskin notebooks that had once thrilled me. Page after page of numbers and arrows and careful, elegant lists. They lifted shoeboxes stuffed with what looked like junk. Burner phones, SIM cards, prepaid cards, thin plastic binders labeled with names that were never born. "Ma'am," the agent at the center of the storm said softly, "you'll want to sit." I didn't. If I sat, I might never stand again. From upstairs, my husband shouted my name. It wasn't my name the way a lover says it. It was a flare, a demand, an order. Fix this. The credit king had been dethroned, and I, his wife, his bookkeeper, his brightest student, had pulled the lever. People know him by his thumbnails: white teeth, blue suit, gold watch flashing like a lighthouse, text that screamed, 800 credit score in 30 days, never pay interest again, 5 secret hacks the banks don't want you to know. His real name was Roman. Online, he was Rocash. On stage, under cold LEDs, he was the credit king. In our kitchen on lazy Sundays, with flour on his chin and a pancake flipping in perfect air, he was just Ro. He taught courses. He sold blueprints. He hosted retreats that felt like baptisms. Men with fresh haircuts and women with careful nails crying when their first approvals hit their inboxes. He had a way of making a stranger feel held, seen, powerful. He didn't preach money. He preached permission. Credit, he'd say, pacing, mic hissing, is the story a bank believes about you. People ate it like gospel because it tasted like a second chance. Somewhere along the way, that gospel slipped into blasphemy. First came the shortcuts that weren't shortcuts, but crowbars. Piggybacking on aged trade lines he controlled through Shell LLCS. File freezes to trap fraud. Department bots in an algorithmic amber. Credit privacy numbers that weren't privacy and weren't numbers anyone had the right to use. Pretty names for ugly doors. "Everyone does it," he told me the first time I flinched. "No," I said. "Everyone wants to." He kissed my forehead. Wanting is a door, too. We met before he was anyone. He was 10 minutes late to a community workshop on budgeting at the library, cocky and barefoot in loafers, apologizing with a grin that warmed the room 3 degrees. He gave a talk that was 70% charm and 30% facts, and everyone still learned something because his faith was contagious. After, he found me in the stacks by the personal finance shelf and asked where the light switches were, like I had flipped all of them on. We were both broke. He had ideas like confetti. I had spreadsheets like prayers. We fell in love the way people fall into cults, hungry, grateful, certain we'd been chosen. I organized his curriculum, filmed and edited his first course on my phone, built his website from a template, answered DMs till 2 in the morning, and watched the enrollments ping like a slot machine paying out. We moved from a one-bedroom to a townhouse to a stucco palace with a pool that caught sunsets like a secret. He bought a Patek. I bought my mother a washing machine. We celebrated both like miracles. It wasn't overnight. It never is. 1,000 choices whisper next until one day you can't remember how first felt. He learned how to perform trust. I learned how to account for it. Trust, I discovered, looks like a clean ledger until you tilt it into the light. It was never just him. That's the part no one understands when they reduce him to a headline. There were partners and consultants and influencers who did collabs and credit repair specialists who were really credential launderers. A whole economy of almost crimes orbiting his star, trading jargon like baseball cards. The internet will always sell you absolution if you can pay shipping. We hired staff, we hired security, we hired a lawyer who smiled like a father at Christmas and said things like aggressive compliance posture. We hired a publicist who taught him to say education instead of advice, community instead of clients, content instead of promises. He went from giving people hope to giving them scripts, 90-day journeys, challenge groups, affiliate rings, badges, belonging. Belonging is a drug. Then came the day I found a name I didn't recognize in QuickBooks, Casey Bleeker. There was a $14,200 consulting fee and a $9,800 outreach expense and a $3,400 SNA platform management charge within 2 weeks. All paid to Casey. All flagged priority. I asked Ro, "Who's Casey?" He didn't look up. You don't need to worry about Casey. 2 months later, Casey was a note in the margins of 3 different moleskins: C-Batch 4, C-Newbins, C-Hide Act. Casey was also a ghost. No LinkedIn, no LLC filing, a P.O. box in Nevada that 8 letters and never burped. Don't think I didn't know what bins meant. Don't think I didn't see the crossfade between financial literacy and synthetic identity creation. Don't think I didn't hear the way my heart knocked when I realized the children applying for their first cards had never taken a breath. Everyone does it, he said again, when I brought him a list of risks. Everyone isn't married to me, I said. He laughed, generous, tender. You married the part of me that wins. It is terrifying, the way love can excuse. It is holy, the way truth refuses to. Here's the part where I want you to hate me. It will be easier for you if you can. I didn't just watch, I participated. I filed the 1099s. I coded the expenses labeled consulting that were really purchases. Old trade lines, driver's licenses that had never been plastic, phone plans that never rang. I made the spreadsheets that made the fraud feel orderly. I helped architect the scaffolding that held up the lie. Every time I signed something, I told myself it was protecting people who'd never been protected. Single moms with collections from a medical emergency that became a credit sentence, veterans with thin files after deployments, immigrants who'd never had the luxury of a 15-year mortgage to age their profile. We're fixing the bias in the system, We said into microphones to rooms that cried and clapped and bought the upsell. And then the wire hit. $644 million. No, we didn't personally receive $644 million. This wasn't a cartoon vault filled with coins. That number is what the affidavit would later call exposure, the sum of credit extended across lenders, across platforms, across 1,000 synthetic ghosts that had no real heartbeat behind it but pulsed anyway. Lines of credit like veins, pumping money nobody earned to people who didn't exist. Our cut was a river inside the river, enough to drown in, enough to make you forget your own name. Scale, he said, eyes bright, shoes off, toes on marble like he needed skin to feel it. We've done what no one's ever done. Exactly, I whispered. He took it as praise. I meant it as a prayer. The first crack came as a DM. She was 22 with a username that sounded like teenage bravado and a photo of a graduation cap tossed into sky. She had taken our 90-day Phoenix course on a payment plan. She had cried on a Zoom when her first card arrived. She had framed the welcome letter like a diploma. Then her bank shut everything down overnight. She said she was being investigated for fraud. She said her mom was going to lose their lease because she'd co-signed on the card. She said she couldn't breathe. I called Ro. Edge case, he said. But he didn't meet my eye. On the retreat the following weekend, he told a story about haters and old systems scared of new money, and the room nodded like we had invented gravity. He had 1,000 wins to point to and 100 success screenshots, and he buried the DM with all of them. But the DMs didn't stop. They multiplied. When a dam cracks, the river remembers the ocean. I stopped sleeping. I started reading legal forums at 3 a.m., bile hot in my throat. I Googled CPN legal and read the same disagreeing articles a dozen times, like a rosary I didn't believe in. I watched a documentary about victims of identity theft and realized the victims weren't always people. The harm was larger than the sum of its parts. The way an earthquake hurts a city, even when no one can point to a single brick and say, "This one did it." But there were people. There was a man in Nebraska whose social security number had been dormant because he'd been in a coma after an accident at 19. He woke up to a credit history that wasn't his. There was a woman in Georgia whose infant daughter, dead at birth and never issued a SSN, somehow had an auto loan and a Best Buy card. There was the veteran in our mentorship program who confessed that his cleaned file came from a cousin who worked at a clinic no one should ever work at. We don't do that, I told Ro, hands shaking. We can't be anywhere near that. Then don't look, he said. I looked. I looked everywhere. And the more I looked, the more the numbers we were celebrating felt like fingerprints at a crime scene. You want to know the night I broke? You want to know when I made the call? It wasn't the $644 million. It wasn't the secret Slack channel where C posted drop locations in initials. It wasn't even the burner in the bottom drawer that vibrated with a code phrase I didn't understand. It was my mother's voice. She called me from the grocery store. Chipper. They pre-approved me for a new card, she said, proud like a little girl with a sticker. I must be doing something right. I smiled so big it hurt. You are, Mama. You've always done everything right. 2 hours later, her account was frozen. Fraud alert. She hadn't done anything wrong at all. She had been flagged because we had fed the machine too many lies. And now the machine was choking on anything it didn't recognize. including the gentle, honest pattern of a retired nurse who'd never missed a bill and wrote thank you notes to cashiers. I hung up the phone and threw up until I saw stars. Then I called a number on a card a journalist had once slipped into my palm at a conference with a look that said, "Someday." "Agent Keller," the voice said, "you took your time." I thought I would feel like a traitor. I didn't. I felt like oxygen. Here is what cooperation looks like when you are married to a constellation. Meetings in office parks that smell like powdered creamer and printer toner and sweat. NDAS, so thick they feel like robes. A slow, surgical reveal so the tumor can be removed without killing the patient. I gave them a breadcrumb trail, and then I gave them a map. I gave them the consulting ledger, with 5 years of payments to names that never posted a single selfie. I gave them the moleskins. I gave them the hard drive a friend had cloned for me when I said I was afraid of losing family photos. Thousands of images of us laughing at beaches and birthdays, and right between those JPEGs, the PDFs that paid for everything we were smiling about. Don't ask me if I cried. I cried like a house with every pipe burst. And then I dried my face and made a list for the next day. I asked for one thing, that they let me be the one to have my mother with me when the news broke. The agent said he would do what he could. He did. The morning of the raid, my phone vibrated on the counter like a sparrow. I texted Mom, "Don't come over. I'm bringing coffee later." She sent 3 heart emojis and a thumbs up, and a photo of a loaf of banana bread cooling on her counter. After the agents left, I ate a slice with my hands and wiped my tears with the paper towel that had wrapped it. It tasted like childhood and salt. From upstairs, Ro shouted again, "Baby? Where are you? What the hell is happening?" I went to him. I owed him that much and more. He was in our closet in a shirt he never wore twice, rage bouncing off the mirrors. He reached for me, and his hands were prayers and fists at once. "You did this," he said, not a question. I didn't lie. I did. Why? Because they were coming either way. This way, I get to be someone I can live with. He stared, hissed a laugh that sounded like a scream under a pillow, and sunk to the floor. "I gave them everything," he whispered. "I gave you everything." "No," I said, gentler than I felt. "You sold it to us." And the bill is due. The indictment read like a language I was learning on the fly. 18 U.S.C., wire fraud, conspiracy, aggravated identity theft, access device fraud, numbers in place of nouns, statutes instead of stories. But every line represented a life that intersected with the machine we built. Some had benefited. New apartments, new cars, new dignity. Many had not. Shuttered accounts, blacklisted files, years of suspicion climbing like ivy over every future application. The blogs called it the $644 million Mirage. The forums split into camps, the betrayed, the still believers, the gleeful enemies dancing on a bonfire of schadenfreude. Our course platform sent a sympathy email that sounded like a breakup text. Our lawyer charged by the minute to say, "Complex." Ro's bond hearing was theater. He wore a suit I hadn't known he owned, muted tie, hair tamed like a penitent. The prosecutor said risk of flight with a velvet blade. The judge said words that sounded like, "No." Rose scanned the room for me, and when he found me, there was a look I will never forgive myself for recognizing. Help me. I couldn't. I had already picked a side. It was late, and It was mine. Mom sat beside me and squeezed my fingers at the worst parts. I was 35 and I felt 5 and 100 at the same time. After, in the parking lot, a reporter shoved a mic in my face and asked if I felt duped. I didn't answer. Dupe is a clean word. I was dirty. We both were. That's the thing I need you to understand if you're tempted to crown new heroes and be done with it. There are no clean hands when the money's that bright. Even refusing stains you. Go ahead, touch a halo, and see if you don't leave fingerprints. I pled to misdemeanors tied to record keeping, cooperation, and stupidity. My lawyer didn't use that last word. I do. I paid fines that hurt, but didn't bankrupt me because I had already emptied my accounts into restitution. I sold the house. I gave the Patek to the case agent to auction. Somewhere, a stranger in a tux checks the time on a watch that remembers our pool. I moved into a one-bedroom with a view of a laundromat. The rhythm of other people's clean start soothed me. I got a job at a nonprofit that helps people untangle identity theft. The irony was an ache and a balm. Angry voices on the phone became my penance. "I'm sorry," I said 1,000 times to people whose pain we had danced through. Sometimes they forgave me without knowing what for. Sometimes they didn't. At night, I wrote this. Do I hate him? On good days, no. On good days, I remember the library and the pancake sundaes, and the way he carried the cooler on beach days like a prize. On bad days, I hate the way he knew me well enough to build a cage I would decorate. On bad nights, I hate myself for how long I admired the bars. He calls from the facility sometimes. There's a delay, like our words travel through a molasses sky. "How's your mother?" he asks. "Baking for the church," I say. "How are you?" "Washing dishes, working, sleeping. Do you still love me?" And here, we meet the problem we built. Love doesn't check a credit bureau. I love the man I met, I say, which is true and kind and incomplete. He tells me he'll be out in less than a decade if the appeals go well, if the math goes his way. He says he's writing a book. He says he has ideas. He laughs at himself for saying it out loud, like the old ego is an old jacket he keeps in a closet for when it fits again. "Don't teach," I say before we hang up. "Please, don't teach." He swallows. "What if teaching is all I am?" "You're not a syllabus," I say. "Be a man. Learn." Sometimes we sit in that silence together like it's a church. Sometimes he ruins it by promising me a life that won't exist. I keep the line open a little longer each time, a mercy we can afford now that the bills have all come due. I'll tell you something that'll ruin every scandal you ever watch again. Villains have good lines. Sometimes the hero is boring, and you want the villain to keep talking because he's funny and bright and fearless. But the punchline of a good line is always the same. Someone bleeds off stage. We stopped counting at 644 million because the numbers stopped mattering and the lives kept going. A number like that is a mountain. If you stare at it, you forget your feet. I live at my feet now. I make pancakes from scratch. I take the bus sometimes because it is humbling, and also because the bus feels like a confessional, where everyone is telling the truth by simply sitting. In my first support group, yes, there is a support group for women who loved men who loved their own reflection. I met a woman whose husband sold miracles in vitamins and another whose boyfriend convinced people to lease their souls to the desert. We go around the circle and practice saying what we did, not just what they did to us. We say it out loud without a microphone, without a thumbnail. We say it and then we breathe. It's less fun than an upsell. It's more real than an apology. Last week, a young woman with a username like Bravado sent me a new DM. She found my nonprofit email. She said she took a course years ago that changed her life. She said that when her accounts got shut, she thought her life was over. She said she wanted to thank me for helping her rebuild. She attached a selfie with a set of apartment keys and a caption that said, "The legal way." I cried. I showed Mom. She baked a banana bread and brought it to the office, and we passed slices on napkins that stuck to our fingers and laughed and cried like people who had found a small, honest corner of the world and claimed it. When I think about Roe, I see him barefoot on marble, grinning, certain, a boy king with a scepter made of what if. When I think about me, I see a woman in a kitchen at dawn, bare feet on cold tile, a mug cooling in a hand that doesn't shake anymore, watching the sky lighten, whispering a truth bright enough to see by. Credit is the story a bank believes about you. Character is the story you won't let yourself forget. And if you need a crown, darling, make it paper. It'll burn fast and you'll be warm long enough to tell the truth. Dive into stories that stir your soul. Jackie Smith. Stories is your daily haven for raw emotions, courageous women, and authentic true life narratives. We weave tales of hope, strength, dreams, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. Our stories inspire, uplift, and remind you you're never alone. Subscribe now to experience a fresh, heartfelt chapter every day that sparks wonder and connection. Join our community and be part of the journey.